Long before the first cities rose from the dust, long before the earliest humans carved their stories into cave walls, long before even the tallest mountains reached toward the sky as we know them today, this planet was alive with creatures, forces, and landscapes so extraordinary that they would seem impossible if we had not found the proof buried deep within the Earth itself. For billions of years, Earth has been a stage for spectacles that dwarf anything our modern world has ever witnessed: titanic beasts that shook the ground with every step, oceans teeming with predators the size of school buses, skies darkened by the wingspans of creatures that could look down on a giraffe, and cataclysms so violent they reshaped the very face of the planet overnight. This is the story of those lost worlds. This is the story of a prehistoric Earth you never imagined. Please let us know in the comments where you are watching this history video and what time you are watching it. And be sure to subscribe to the channel for future videos. Now, settle in, because the journey we are about to take stretches across billions of years, and almost nothing about it is what you were taught in school. Let us begin at the very start, or at least as close to the start as science can take us. When Earth first formed roughly 4.5 billion years ago, it looked nothing like the blue marble we recognize today. There were no oceans, no continents, no breathable air. Instead, our newborn planet was a hellscape of molten rock, volcanic eruptions that stretched from horizon to horizon, and surface temperatures hot enough to melt lead. Scientists call this period the Hadean Eon, named after Hades, the ancient Greek god of the underworld, and the name is well earned. For hundreds of millions of years, Earth was essentially a ball of lava floating through space, constantly bombarded by asteroids and comets left over from the formation of the solar system. The sky above was choked with poisonous gases, carbon dioxide, methane, ammonia, and almost no oxygen whatsoever. If you could somehow travel back and stand on the surface of the Hadean Earth, you would not survive a single second. Not because of the heat alone, though that would certainly kill you, but because there was literally nothing to breathe. The atmosphere was toxic in every sense of the word, and yet it was precisely this violent, chaotic beginning that set the stage for everything that would follow. Without the volcanic outgassing that created that early atmosphere, without the water delivered by those countless cometary impacts, without the slow cooling that eventually allowed the first oceans to form, life as we know it could never have begun. And speaking of those first oceans, they arrived far earlier than most people realize. Evidence from ancient minerals called zircons suggests that liquid water may have existed on Earth's surface as early as 4.4 billion years ago, only about 100 million years after the planet itself formed. That is an astonishingly short window of time in geological terms. It means that even while Earth was still being pummeled by debris from space, even while the surface was still unimaginably hostile, water was already pooling in low-lying areas, forming the earliest seas. These were not the clear blue waters we picture when we think of an ocean today. They were hot, acidic, and stained by minerals leached from volcanic rock. But they were water, and water, as we would eventually learn, is the single most important ingredient for life. Now, one of the most profound mysteries in all of science is the question of how life actually began. We know it happened. We know it happened early. The oldest confirmed fossils of living organisms date back roughly 3.5 billion years, and chemical signatures in even older rocks suggest that life may have been present as far back as 3.8 billion years ago, or possibly even earlier. But the exact mechanism by which non-living chemistry transformed into the first living cell remains one of the great unsolved puzzles. What we do know is that the earliest life forms on Earth were unimaginably simple, single-celled organisms, likely similar to modern bacteria, that thrived in the hot, oxygen-free environments of early Earth. They did not need sunlight. They did not need oxygen. They fed on chemical energy from hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor, volcanic seeps, and mineral-rich waters. These microscopic pioneers were the ancestors of every living thing that has ever existed on this planet. Every tree, every insect, every dinosaur, every whale, and every human being. It all started with cells so small that billions of them could fit in a single drop of water. but here is something that most people find genuinely shocking when they first learn it. For the first 2 billion years of life on Earth, 2 billion years life remained single-celled. There were no animals, there were no plants, there were no multicellular organisms of any kind, just bacteria and later, slightly more complex single-celled organisms called archaea. For a span of time so vast it is almost impossible to comprehend, the most advanced life forms on the entire planet were microscopic. If the entire history of Earth were compressed into a single 24-hour day, multicellular life would not appear until roughly the last 5 hours. Complex animals with hard body parts would not show up until the last hour and a half. Dinosaurs would roam the Earth for about 45 minutes. And the entire span of human civilization, every empire, every war, every invention, every moment of recorded history would occupy less than the final second. That is how long life spent in its simplest form. That is how patient evolution can be, and yet during those seemingly uneventful 2 billion years, something truly world-changing was happening. A group of bacteria known as cyanobacteria evolved the ability to photosynthesize, to capture energy from sunlight, and, as a byproduct, release oxygen. At first, this oxygen was absorbed by iron dissolved in the oceans, creating massive deposits of rust that we can still see today in banded iron formations found on every continent. But eventually, the oceans became saturated. There was no more dissolved iron to absorb the oxygen, and so it began to accumulate in the atmosphere. This event, which scientists call the Great Oxidation Event, occurred roughly 2.4 billion years ago, and it was, without exaggeration, the single most transformative event in the history of life on Earth. It was also, paradoxically, one of the deadliest. Oxygen, which we think of as the very essence of life, was actually a deadly poison to most of the organisms that existed at the time. They had evolved in an oxygen-free world, and for them, this new gas was as lethal as cyanide. The Great Oxidation Event triggered a mass extinction that may have wiped out the majority of life on the planet. It was Earth's first great apocalypse, caused not by an asteroid or a volcanic eruption, but by the waste products of tiny, photosynthesizing bacteria. The rise of oxygen also had another dramatic consequence that is often overlooked. It likely triggered one of the most extreme ice ages in Earth's history, an event known as Snowball Earth. The reasoning goes like this: as oxygen accumulated in the atmosphere, it reacted with methane, a powerful greenhouse gas that had been helping to keep the planet warm. The destruction of atmospheric methane caused global temperatures to plummet, and ice sheets advanced from the poles toward the equator. Some scientists believe that Earth became almost entirely encased in ice, with glaciers reaching all the way to the tropics and the oceans freezing over to a depth of a kilometer or more. The planet may have resembled a giant snowball hanging in space, hence the name. This deep freeze may have lasted for tens of millions of years, and it came perilously close to extinguishing life altogether. Only organisms living near hydrothermal vents on the ocean floor or in pockets of liquid water beneath the ice survived. It is a sobering thought. Life on Earth nearly ended, not once but possibly multiple times, during these ancient glacial episodes, long before the first animal ever drew breath. But life did survive. And when the ice finally retreated, the world that emerged was very different from the one that had been frozen. The survivors of Snowball Earth found themselves in a planet with rising oxygen levels and new ecological opportunities. And it was in this transformed world, sometime around 600 million years ago, that something truly remarkable happened. For the first time in the history of the planet, multicellular organisms began to evolve in earnest. The earliest of these were soft-bodied, strange-looking creatures that bear little resemblance to anything alive today. Scientists call this period the Ediacaran, named after the Ediacaran Hills in Australia, where some of the first fossils were discovered. Ediacaran organisms were bizarre by any standard. Some looked like quilted mattresses, others resembled fern fronds or ribbed discs. Some were flat and leaf-shaped, lying on the ocean floor like living doormats. They had no eyes, no mouths, no legs, no shells. Many of them may have absorbed nutrients directly through their skin. For decades, scientists debated whether these organisms were animals, plants, fungi, or something else entirely, a failed experiment in multicellular life that left no descendants. Recent research suggests that at least some of them were indeed early animals, but their body plans were so unlike anything that came later that they remain among the most enigmatic fossils ever found. The Ediacaran world came to an end around 540 million years ago, and what followed was one of the most explosive episodes of evolutionary innovation in the history of life. Scientists call it the Cambrian explosion, and the name is apt. In a span of roughly 20 to 25 million years, a blink of an eye in geological terms, nearly all of the major animal body plans that exist today appeared for the first time. Suddenly, the oceans were teeming with creatures that had eyes, legs, claws, shells, spines, and exoskeletons. Predators and prey appeared simultaneously, locked in an evolutionary arms race that would drive innovation for the rest of Earth's history. The Cambrian explosion is often described as the Big Bang of animal evolution, and for good reason. Before it, the fossil record is sparse and dominated by soft-bodied, simple organisms. After it, the oceans are alive with an astonishing diversity of complex animals. What caused this sudden burst of creativity? Scientists have proposed many explanations: rising oxygen levels, changes in ocean chemistry, the evolution of eyes, the development of predation as a survival strategy, but no single explanation has proven entirely satisfactory. The Cambrian explosion remains one of the great mysteries of paleontology. Among the most iconic creatures of the Cambrian seas was Anomalocaris, a predator that ruled the oceans 500 million years ago. By the standards of its time, it was a giant reaching lengths of up to a meter, or roughly 3 feet, in a world where most other animals were measured in centimeters. It had a pair of large, grasping appendages at the front of its head, a circular mouth lined with tooth-like plates, and a series of flexible lobes along its body that it used to swim through the water. It was the apex predator of the Cambrian, and nothing in the oceans could challenge it. To the tiny trilobites and worms that shared its world, Anomalocaris must have been a terrifying sight, a creature of nightmares in a world that was only just learning what nightmares were. And then there were the trilobites themselves, perhaps the most successful group of animals the world has ever known. Trilobites first appeared during the Cambrian, and they survived for an astonishing 300 million years, far longer than the dinosaurs, far longer than any mammal has yet managed. They came in an incredible variety of shapes and sizes, from tiny species barely visible to the naked eye to giants more than 2 feet long. Some had enormous compound eyes with thousands of individual lenses. Others were completely blind. Some rolled into balls for protection, like modern pill bugs. Others burrowed into the seafloor, swam through open water, or crawled along coral reefs. Trilobites were among the first animals to evolve truly sophisticated eyes, and their visual system was so well designed that it is still studied by optical engineers today. The lenses of trilobite eyes were made of calcite crystals, arranged in a way that corrected for optical distortion, a problem that human lens makers did not solve until the 17th century. 500 million years before the first telescope was invented, trilobites had already figured it out. The Cambrian seas were also home to a creature that holds a special significance for us, though it was so small and unremarkable looking that no one would have noticed it at the time. Pikaia was a worm-like animal, only a few centimeters long, with a flattened body and a faint line running down its back. That line was a notochord, a primitive backbone. Pikaia is one of the earliest known chordates, the group of animals that includes all vertebrates: fish, amphibians, reptiles, birds, mammals, and yes, humans. In other words, this tiny, inconspicuous creature wriggling through the Cambrian mud was, in a very real sense, our ancestor. Every bone in your body, every vertebra in your spine, traces its lineage back to creatures like Pikaia. It is a humbling reminder that the grandest stories often begin with the smallest characters. As the Cambrian gave way to the Ordovician period, around 485 million years ago, life in the oceans continued to diversify at a breathtaking pace. This period saw the rise of massive coral reefs, the proliferation of cephalopods, the ancestors of modern squids and octopuses, and the emergence of the first true fish. But the Ordovician is perhaps best known for the catastrophe that ended it. Roughly 445 million years ago, Earth was struck by a devastating mass extinction, one of the 5 worst in the planet's history. The cause is still debated, but the leading hypothesis involves a sudden and severe ice age. Glaciers expanded rapidly, sea levels dropped by hundreds of feet, and the shallow marine environments where most life existed were destroyed. As much as 85% of all species may have perished. It was a stark reminder that even after life had achieved a dazzling level of diversity, the planet could still snatch it all away with terrifying speed. But extinction, as it turns out, is also opportunity. The survivors of the Ordovician extinction found themselves in a world with empty ecological niches waiting to be filled, and fill them they did. The Silurian and Devonian periods that followed saw some of the most important evolutionary milestones in the history of life. It was during the Silurian, around 430 million years ago, that the first plants began to colonize the land. These earliest land plants were tiny, barely more than a few centimeters tall, and they lacked roots, leaves, and seeds. They clung to the edges of streams and shorelines, slowly, tentatively venturing out of the water that had been life's home for billions of years. It is hard to overstate how momentous this transition was. For the first time, life was leaving the oceans, the cradle of its existence, and staking a claim on the barren, rocky continents. The land had been lifeless for the entirety of Earth's history up to this point. There was no soil, no vegetation, no organic matter of any kind, just bare rock, sand, and wind. These first pioneer plants changed all of that. They began the slow process of breaking down rock, creating soil, and transforming the land's surface into something that could support ever more complex forms of life. Close on the heels of the plants came the first land animals. The earliest to make the transition were arthropods, relatives of modern spiders, scorpions, and millipedes. Fossil trackways from the late Silurian and early Devonian show that small, multi-legged creatures were already walking on land more than 400 million years ago. Some of the earliest land animals were truly bizarre. Pneumodesmus, discovered in Scotland, is one of the oldest known land animals, dating back roughly 428 million years. It was a small millipede, only about a centimeter long, but it had a feature that was revolutionary: spiracles or breathing holes that allowed it to take in oxygen directly from the air. For a creature descended from ancestors that breathed through gills, this was a profound evolutionary leap. The Devonian period, which lasted from roughly 419 million to 359 million years ago, is often called the Age of Fishes, and for good reason. During this period, fish underwent an extraordinary evolutionary radiation. The oceans, rivers, and lakes were dominated by an incredible variety of fish, from the jawless lampreys and hagfish to the heavily armored placoderms, to the ancestors of modern sharks and bony fish. Among the most fearsome of these was Dunkleosteus, a placoderm that could grow to lengths of over 20 feet and possess the most powerful bite of any fish that has ever lived. Dunkleosteus did not have teeth in the conventional sense. Instead, its jaws were lined with bony plates that formed sharp, self-sharpening blades capable of slicing through virtually anything. Scientists have estimated that its bite force was comparable to that of a modern Tyrannosaurus rex. In the Devonian seas, Dunkleosteus was the undisputed king. But the Devonians' greatest contribution to the story of life was not a fish that stayed in the water. It was the group of fish that left it. During the late Devonian, a group of lobe-finned fish began to evolve features that would allow them to survive on land. Their fins became thicker and more muscular, developing internal bones that could support their weight. Their swim bladders, originally used for buoyancy, began to function as primitive lungs. These transitional creatures, animals like Tiktaalik, discovered in the Canadian Arctic in 2004, represent one of the most important transitions in the history of life. the moment when vertebrates first crawled out of the water and onto the land. Tiktaalik is often called a fishapod because it possessed a remarkable combination of fish and amphibian features. It had scales and fins like a fish, but it also had a flat head, a flexible neck, and front fins with wrist-like joints that allowed it to prop itself up and walk along shallow riverbeds and mudflats. Tiktaalik is not necessarily our direct ancestor, but it is representative of the type of creature that gave rise to all land-dwelling vertebrates. Every frog, every lizard, every bird, every mammal, all of them trace their ancestry back to brave, pioneering fish that dared to crawl out of the water during the late Devonian. The colonization of the land by vertebrates set the stage for one of the most dramatic transformations the planet has ever seen. During the Carboniferous period, which followed the Devonian and lasted from roughly 359 to 299 million years ago, the continents underwent a stunning metamorphosis. Vast swamp forests spread across the tropical regions, covering millions of square miles with dense vegetation. These forests were unlike anything that exists today. The dominant plants were not flowering trees or broadleaf hardwoods, but giant relatives of modern club mosses, horsetails, and ferns. Lepidodendron, the scale tree, could grow to heights of over 130 feet, taller than a 10-story building. Calamites, a giant horsetail, reached heights of over 60 feet. The trunks of these trees were covered in distinctive diamond-shaped patterns, and their root systems formed tangled mats that stabilized the swampy ground beneath them. When these trees died, they fell into the waterlogged soil and were buried before they could fully decompose. Over millions of years, the accumulated layers of dead vegetation were compressed and transformed by heat and pressure into the vast coal deposits that would one day power the Industrial Revolution. This is why the period is called the Carboniferous. It was literally the age that created carbon in the form of coal. But why did all that dead plant material accumulate in the first place? Why didn't it just rot away as fallen trees do today? The answer is one of the most fascinating and surprising facts about the prehistoric world. During the Carboniferous, the fungi and microorganisms that are responsible for breaking down wood had not yet fully evolved the ability to digest lignin, the tough structural molecule that gives wood its rigidity and strength. Lignin had evolved in plants as a defense mechanism, allowing them to grow tall and resist predation and disease. But for tens of millions of years, nothing in nature could break it down efficiently. So dead trees simply piled up, century after century, millennium after millennium, burying carbon underground and preventing it from returning to the atmosphere. This had a profound effect on the planet's climate. With all that carbon locked away underground, carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere plummeted and oxygen levels soared. During the late Carboniferous, atmospheric oxygen may have reached concentrations as high as 35%, compared to the 21% we breathe today. This oxygen-rich atmosphere had dramatic consequences for life on land. The most spectacular consequence was gigantism. With more oxygen available, arthropods, which breathe through a network of tubes called tracheae rather than lungs, were able to grow to sizes that would be impossible today. The most famous example is Meganeura, a dragonfly-like insect with a wingspan of over 2.5 feet. Imagine a dragonfly the size of a hawk buzzing through the Carboniferous swamp forests, hunting other insects and small vertebrates. Meganeura was not alone in its enormity. Arthropleura, a giant millipede, could grow to lengths of over 8 feet, longer than a car. It was the largest land-dwelling invertebrate that has ever lived. Giant scorpions, enormous cockroaches, and massive spiders also thrived in this oxygen-rich environment. For anyone with a fear of insects, the Carboniferous period would have been a living nightmare. But the giant bugs were not the only remarkable inhabitants of the Carboniferous. This period also saw the rise of the first reptiles. The earliest reptiles evolved from amphibian ancestors and possessed a key innovation that freed them from dependence on water, the amniotic egg. Unlike amphibians, which must lay their eggs in water or moist environments, reptiles evolved eggs with tough, leathery shells that could be laid on dry land. Inside the egg, a series of membranes protected the developing embryo and provided it with nutrients and water, creating a self-contained environment that functioned as a miniature pond. This seemingly simple innovation was revolutionary. It allowed vertebrates to colonize the interiors of continents, far from rivers, lakes, and coastlines. For the first time, animals could live their entire lives on land without ever returning to the water. The amniotic egg was, in many ways, the key that unlocked the terrestrial world for vertebrates. The end of the Carboniferous and the beginning of the Permian period, around 299 million years ago, brought significant changes to the planet. The great swamp forests began to decline as the climate became drier, and new types of plants, better adapted to arid conditions, began to dominate. The continents were slowly drifting together, forming the supercontinent Pangaea, a single, massive landmass that stretched nearly from pole to pole. Pangaea's interior was vast, dry, and subject to extreme temperature swings, creating environments that favored tough, adaptable creatures. Among the most successful animals of the Permian were the synapsids, a group of reptile-like creatures that are actually the ancestors of all modern mammals, including us. The synapsids are sometimes called mammal-like reptiles, though this term is somewhat misleading because they were not true reptiles. They belong to a separate evolutionary lineage that diverged from the reptile line very early in the history of amniotes. Early synapsids like Dimetrodon, with its famous sail-like fin on its back, are among the most recognizable prehistoric animals. Dimetrodon lived roughly 295 to 272 million years ago during the early Permian. Its sail, which was supported by elongated spines extending from its vertebrae, is thought to have been used for thermoregulation, absorbing heat from the sun in the morning to warm the animal up, and radiating excess heat later in the day. Dimetrodon was a top predator in its ecosystem, growing up to 15 feet long and possessing powerful jaws lined with different types of teeth, an early sign of the dental specialization that would eventually become a hallmark of mammals. Many people mistakenly believe that Dimetrodon was a dinosaur. It was not. It lived and went extinct tens of millions of years before the first dinosaur ever appeared. In fact, Dimetrodon is more closely related to you than it is to any dinosaur that ever lived. As the Permian progressed, the synapsids continued to diversify and became increasingly mammal-like. Some developed more upright postures. Others evolved more efficient chewing mechanisms, with differentiated teeth for different functions, incisors for cutting, canines for piercing, and molars for grinding. A group called the therapsids became the dominant land animals of the late Permian, occupying ecological roles ranging from small insectivores to massive herbivores and fearsome predators. Among the most impressive therapsids were the Gorgonopsians, saber-toothed predators that could grow to the size of a large bear. Their elongated canine teeth, reminiscent of the much later saber-toothed cats, were capable of delivering devastating bites to their prey. The Gorgonopsians were the apex predators of the late Permian world, and they seemed poised to dominate the planet for millions of years to come. But then came the catastrophe. Roughly 252 million years ago, at the boundary between the Permian and Triassic periods, Earth experienced the most devastating mass extinction event in its entire history. Scientists call it the Permian-Triassic extinction, but it is more commonly known by a simpler, more evocative name, the Great Dying, and the name barely does justice to the scale of the devastation. As many as 96% of all marine species and 70% of all terrestrial vertebrate species were wiped out. Entire families, orders, and classes of organisms that had thrived for hundreds of millions of years were obliterated in what was, geologically speaking, a heartbeat. The Trilobites, those resilient arthropods that had survived for 300 million years, finally met their end. The Gorgonopsians vanished. Countless other groups were erased from the tree of life forever. What caused this unparalleled catastrophe? The evidence points to massive volcanic eruptions in what is now Siberia. The Siberian traps, as they are known, were one of the largest volcanic events in Earth's history. Over a period of roughly 1 million years, volcanic activity released staggering amounts of lava, ash, and gases. The lava flows alone covered an area of roughly 2 million square miles, an area larger than Western Europe. But it was not the lava itself that killed most of the planet's life. It was the gases. The eruptions released enormous quantities of carbon dioxide and sulfur dioxide into the atmosphere. The carbon dioxide caused rapid global warming, raising temperatures by as much as 10 degrees Celsius. The sulfur dioxide combined with water in the atmosphere to create sulfuric acid, which fell as acid rain, poisoning soils and waterways. The warming oceans lost much of their dissolved oxygen, creating vast, dead zones where nothing could survive. Methane trapped in ocean sediments was released as temperatures rose, creating a feedback loop that drove temperatures even higher. The combined effects were apocalyptic. The Great Dying brought life on Earth closer to total annihilation than any event before or since. It took the planet an estimated 10 million years to fully recover, longer than the time it takes for most species to evolve from scratch. And yet, recover it did. The survivors of the Great Dying found themselves in a world stripped bare, a world where almost every ecological niche was vacant and waiting to be filled. Among the survivors were a few lineages of therapsids, the mammal-like synapsids, and a group of reptiles called archosaurs. In the aftermath of the extinction, these two groups competed for dominance of the land. For a time, the therapsids seemed to have the upper hand. A group called the cynodonts, which were very close to being true mammals, were common and diverse in the early Triassic. But gradually, over millions of years, the archosaurs gained the advantage. They evolved more efficient respiratory systems, with air sacs that allowed for a continuous flow of air through their lungs, a system far more efficient than the bellows-like breathing of mammals. This may have given them a crucial edge in the low oxygen conditions of the early Triassic. The archosaurs diversified rapidly, giving rise to two major lineages, the crocodilian line and the dinosaur line. And it was the dinosaur line that would ultimately come to dominate the planet for the next 165 million years. The oldest known dinosaurs appeared roughly 233 million years ago, during the Middle Triassic period. They were not the enormous, awe-inspiring creatures we picture when we hear the word dinosaur. They were small, bipedal predators, most of them no larger than a dog. Aeoraptor, one of the earliest known dinosaurs, was only about 3 feet long and weighed roughly 20 pounds. Herosaurus, another early dinosaur, was somewhat larger but still modest by later standards. These early dinosaurs were just one of many groups of animals competing for resources in the Triassic world, and there was nothing about them that obviously marked them for future greatness. They were minor players in an ecosystem dominated by larger archosaurs, massive amphibians, and surviving therapsids. If you had visited the Earth 230 million years ago and tried to predict which group would eventually rule the planet, you would almost certainly not have picked the dinosaurs. But the dinosaurs had something going for them, a combination of traits that, taken together, gave them an edge that would eventually prove decisive. Their upright bipedal posture was more energy efficient than the sprawling gait of their competitors. Their respiratory system, inherited from their archosaur ancestors, was highly efficient, and they were versatile, capable of adapting to a wide range of ecological roles. When another mass extinction struck at the end of the Triassic period, roughly 201 million years ago, many of the dinosaurs' competitors were wiped out. The cause of this extinction is still debated, but it may have been linked to volcanic activity associated with the breakup of Pangaea. Whatever the cause, the end Triassic extinction cleared the stage for the dinosaurs. They diversified explosively in its aftermath, evolving into an astonishing variety of forms, from tiny insectivores to massive herbivores, from fleet-footed predators to lumbering giants. The Age of Dinosaurs had begun. The Jurassic period, which followed the Triassic and lasted from roughly 201 to 145 million years ago, was the golden age of the dinosaurs. It was during this period that many of the most iconic dinosaur groups first appeared and rose to prominence. The sauropods, the long-necked, long-tailed giants that are among the most recognizable of all dinosaurs, underwent their most dramatic evolutionary radiation during the Jurassic. These were the largest land animals that have ever existed, and their sheer size is almost impossible to comprehend. Brachiosaurus, one of the best-known sauropods, stood roughly 40 feet tall and weighed an estimated 60 tons, but Brachiosaurus was far from the largest. Diplodocus stretched to lengths of over 80 feet, most of it neck and tail. Supersaurus may have been even longer, possibly exceeding 100 feet. And the truly colossal sauropods, animals like Argentinosaurus and Patagotitan, would not appear until the Cretaceous, when they reached weights that may have exceeded 70 or even 100 tons. How could an animal grow to such an enormous size? The answer lies in a combination of factors that were unique to sauropods. Their bones were riddled with air sacs connected to their respiratory system, making their skeletons remarkably lightweight for their size. Their small heads and simple, peg-like teeth allowed them to strip vegetation quickly without the need for extensive chewing. They simply swallowed their food whole and let their massive digestive systems do the work. Their long necks allowed them to reach food sources that no other animal could access, sweeping across vast areas without needing to move their enormous bodies. And their metabolic rate, which was likely higher than that of modern reptiles but lower than that of modern mammals, allowed them to sustain their massive bulk on the available food supply. Every aspect of sauropod biology was fine-tuned for gigantism, and the result was a group of animals that reached sizes no land animal has approached before or since. The Jurassic was also the period that gave rise to one of the most feared predators in Earth's history, Allosaurus. Growing to lengths of over 30 feet and weighing up to 2 tons, Allosaurus was the apex predator of the late Jurassic landscape. It was a theropod, a member of the same group of bipedal carnivorous dinosaurs that would later produce Tyrannosaurus rex, and it was superbly adapted for hunting. Its skull was unusually light for its size, built more like a hatchet than a vise, allowing it to deliver slashing, axe-like bites that inflicted deep, bleeding wounds on its prey. Some scientists have suggested that Allosaurus may have hunted in groups, cooperating to bring down sauropods many times its own size. The evidence for this is debated, but there are fossil sites where multiple Allosaurus skeletons have been found together with the remains of large herbivores, suggesting that pack hunting may have been at least an occasional strategy. But perhaps the most astonishing thing about the Jurassic world is not the size of its inhabitants, but the fact that some of its smallest residents were laying the groundwork for a revolution that would eventually reshape the entire planet. It was during the Jurassic that a group of small, feathered theropod dinosaurs began to evolve the ability to fly. The relationship between dinosaurs and birds is one of the greatest discoveries in the history of paleontology, and it has fundamentally changed our understanding of what dinosaurs were. Birds are not merely descended from dinosaurs, they are dinosaurs. They are the living, breathing descendants of theropod dinosaurs, and they carry the legacy of the Mesozoic era in every feather and hollow bone. The oldest known bird, Archaeopteryx, lived roughly 150 million years ago during the late Jurassic. It had feathered wings and could probably fly, at least in a limited fashion, but it also retained many distinctly dinosaurian features: teeth, a bony tail, and clawed fingers on its wings. Archaeopteryx was not the ancestor of modern birds, it was more of an evolutionary cousin, but it provides a stunning snapshot of the moment when dinosaurs took to the skies. And feathers themselves are far older than flight. Fossil discoveries from China, particularly from the Liaoning province, have revealed dozens of species of feathered dinosaurs, many of which could not fly at all. These fossils show that feathers originally evolved not for flight but for other purposes: insulation, display, and camouflage among them. Many theropod dinosaurs were covered in fluffy, hair-like feathers that kept them warm, much like fur on a mammal. Others had elaborate display feathers in vivid colors and patterns, used to attract mates or intimidate rivals. The image of dinosaurs as scaly, reptilian monsters has been thoroughly overturned by these discoveries. Many dinosaurs, including relatives of Tyrannosaurus rex, were covered in feathers for at least part of their lives. The boundary between dinosaurs and birds, once thought to be sharp and clear, has been revealed to be blurry, gradual, and far more fascinating than anyone imagined. While the dinosaurs dominated the land during the Jurassic and Cretaceous periods, the oceans were ruled by their own caste of magnificent predators. Marine reptiles, not dinosaurs but contemporary relatives, occupied the top of the oceanic food chain for over 100 million years. Among the most impressive were the ichthyosaurs, dolphin-like reptiles that were superbly adapted for life in the open ocean. Some ichthyosaurs were enormous. Shastasaurus from the Triassic period could grow to lengths of over 60 feet, making it one of the largest marine reptiles that ever lived. But what makes ichthyosaurs truly remarkable is how perfectly adapted they were for aquatic life. Despite being descended from land-dwelling ancestors, they had evolved streamlined bodies, paddle-like flippers, and a vertical tail fin that bore an uncanny resemblance to those of modern dolphins and tuna, a stunning example of convergent evolution, where unrelated organisms independently evolve similar solutions to the same environmental challenges. Ichthyosaurs even gave birth to live young in the water, just like modern dolphins and whales. Fossil evidence shows baby ichthyosaurs emerging tail first from their mothers, exactly as baby dolphins do, a strategy that prevents the newborn from drowning during birth. The plesiosaurs were another major group of marine reptiles that thrived alongside the ichthyosaurs. Unlike the streamlined, fast-swimming ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs were built for maneuverability. They had broad, flat bodies, 4 large, paddle-like flippers, and in the case of the long-necked plesiosaurs, extraordinarily elongated necks that could reach lengths of over 20 feet. The long-necked plesiosaurs, such as Allosaurus, used their necks to ambush fish, darting their small heads into schools of prey with lightning speed while their bodies remained relatively stationary. The short-necked plesiosaurs, known as pliosaurs, took a very different approach. They were built for power and aggression, with massive heads, enormous jaws, and conical teeth designed for seizing and crushing large prey. Dimetrodon, one of the most famous pliosaurs, could grow to lengths of over 20 feet and possessed one of the strongest bites of any marine animal in Earth's history. The largest pliosaurs, like Plesiosaurus, may have been even bigger, with skulls over 6 feet long and estimated body lengths approaching 40 feet. And then there were the mosasaurs, the late arrivals to the marine reptile party. Mosasaurs appeared during the late Cretaceous period, only about 100 million years ago, but they quickly rose to become the dominant predators of the world's oceans. They were closely related to modern monitor lizards and snakes, and like those animals, they had flexible jaws that could open wide to swallow large prey. The largest mosasaurs, such as Mosasaurus itself, could grow to lengths of over 50 feet. They were fast, powerful, and voracious, and by the end of the Cretaceous, they had supplanted the ichthyosaurs, which had already gone extinct, and the plesiosaurs as the top predators of the sea. When the asteroid struck 66 million years ago, the mosasaurs were at the peak of their reign. Speaking of the skies during the Mesozoic, they were not empty either. The pterosaurs, flying reptiles that were the first vertebrates to evolve powered flight, ruled the air for over 160 million years. The earliest pterosaurs were relatively small, with wingspans of a few feet, but by the late Cretaceous, they had evolved into the largest flying animals of all time. Quetzalcoatlus, named after the Aztec feathered serpent god, had a wingspan of over 36 feet, wider than many small aircraft. When standing on the ground, it was as tall as a giraffe. It is thought to have been an apex predator on land as well as in the air, stalking across open plains and snatching up small dinosaurs and other prey in its enormous, toothless beak. Quetzalcoatlus was not an isolated giant. Other late Cretaceous pterosaurs, such as Hatzegopteryx, were of similar size and may have been even more robustly built. These animals stretch the boundaries of what we thought was possible for a flying creature, and they remain a testament to the extraordinary capacity of evolution to push the limits of biological design. But pterosaurs were not just about size. They were also remarkably diverse and adaptable. Some were filter feeders, skimming the surfaces of lakes and lagoons for tiny crustaceans, much like modern flamingos. Others were specialized fish eaters, with elongated jaws and interlocking teeth perfectly designed for snatching slippery prey from the water. Some had elaborate crests on their heads, used for display and species recognition. Others were covered in a fine hair-like covering called pycnofibers, which insulated their bodies and suggests that they were warm-blooded, a conclusion supported by studies of their bone structure and growth rates. Pterosaurs were not the clumsy, leathery winged creatures they are often depicted as in popular media. They were sophisticated, highly evolved animals that mastered the air millions of years before birds became the dominant flyers. Now, while these magnificent creatures were ruling the land, sea, and sky, the ancestors of modern mammals were living a very different kind of life. Throughout the entire Mesozoic era, a span of over 180 million years, mammals remained small, inconspicuous, and largely nocturnal. The earliest true mammals appeared during the late Triassic, roughly 225 million years ago, and for the entire duration of the Age of Dinosaurs, they stayed in the shadows. Most Mesozoic mammals were no larger than a mouse or a shrew. They lived in burrows, in trees, and in dense undergrowth, venturing out mainly at night to avoid the dinosaurs that dominated the daylight hours. This prolonged period of nocturnal living left a lasting legacy. The extraordinary night vision of many modern mammals, the reliance on smell and hearing rather than sight, the development of whiskers for navigating in the dark, all of these traits are inheritances from our ancestors' long sojourn in the shadows of the dinosaurs. But it would be a mistake to think of Mesozoic mammals as mere survivors, cowering in fear of the dinosaurs. Recent fossil discoveries have revealed that Mesozoic mammals were far more diverse and ecologically varied than previously thought. Some were swimmers with webbed feet and flattened tails like prehistoric otters. Others were gliders with membranes stretched between their limbs that allowed them to soar between the trees like modern flying squirrels. Some were burrowers with powerful forelimbs adapted for digging. At least one Reptiles from the Cretaceous of China was large enough to eat small dinosaurs, and a specimen was found with the bones of a baby dinosaur in its stomach. Reptiles was roughly the size of a badger, making it one of the largest known Mesozoic mammals, and its discovery shattered the long-held assumption that all mammals during the Age of Dinosaurs were tiny, timid creatures. The Cretaceous period, which lasted from 145 million to 66 million years ago, was the final act of the Mesozoic era, and it was in many ways the most spectacular. It was during the Cretaceous that many of the most famous dinosaurs lived. Tyrannosaurus rex, the king of the tyrant lizards, prowled the landscapes of the late Cretaceous, its massive skull-housing jaws that could crush bone like matchsticks. T-Rex was one of the largest land predators of all time, reaching lengths of over 40 feet and weights of over 9 tons. Its teeth were the size of bananas, and its bite force, estimated at over 12,000 pounds, was the strongest of any terrestrial animal that has ever been measured. Despite its fearsome reputation, T-Rex was also a remarkably sophisticated animal. Studies of its brain case reveal that it had an exceptionally large olfactory bulb, giving it an extraordinary sense of smell. Its binocular vision was comparable to that of a modern hawk, allowing it to see prey with astonishing clarity and depth perception. And its brain, relative to its body size, was larger than that of most other dinosaurs, suggesting a level of intelligence that may have exceeded what we typically attribute to reptiles. Some scientists have even suggested that T-Rex may have been capable of problem-solving and social behavior, though this remains speculative. Triceratops, another icon of the late Cretaceous, was the quintessential armored herbivore. With its 3 horns, enormous neck frill, and parrot-like beak, it was one of the most visually striking dinosaurs that ever lived. Triceratops could grow to lengths of over 30 feet and weigh up to 12 tons, making it one of the largest ceratopsians or horned dinosaurs. Its horns were not just for show. Fossil evidence shows that Triceratops individuals frequently sustained injuries consistent with horn-to-horn combat, suggesting that they jousted with each other in contests for mates or territory, much like modern elk or bighorn sheep. Some Triceratops skulls show puncture wounds and healed fractures that perfectly match the dimensions of another Triceratops horn, providing vivid evidence of brutal, head-on clashes between these formidable animals. The Cretaceous period also witnessed one of the most important evolutionary events in the history of the plant kingdom, the rise of flowering plants or angiosperms. Before the Cretaceous, the world's vegetation was dominated by conifers, ferns, and cycads. Flowers were unknown. But sometime during the early Cretaceous, perhaps around 130 million years ago, the first flowering plants appeared and they diversified with extraordinary speed. By the end of the Cretaceous, angiosperms had become the dominant plant group on Earth, a position they still hold today. The spread of flowering plants transformed ecosystems around the world. They provided new food sources for insects, which diversified explosively in response, leading to the evolution of the first bees, butterflies, and moths. The co-evolution of flowering plants and their pollinators was one of the most intricate and beautiful ecological partnerships in the history of life, and its consequences are still visible in every garden, meadow, and forest on the planet today. As the Cretaceous drew to a close, the stage was set for the most famous catastrophe in Earth's history. 66 million years ago, on what was otherwise an ordinary day in the late Cretaceous, a chunk of rock roughly 6 miles in diameter hurtled through the atmosphere at a speed of roughly 44,000 miles per hour and slammed into what is now the Yucatan Peninsula of Mexico. The impact released energy equivalent to roughly 10 billion nuclear bombs. It carved out a crater over 100 miles wide and 12 miles deep. The initial blast wave incinerated everything within hundreds of miles. Superheated debris was thrown high into the atmosphere and rained back down across the planet, igniting wildfires on a global scale. Within hours, the entire surface of the Earth may have been heated to temperatures comparable to a broiler oven, killing any animal that could not find shelter underground or underwater. In the days and weeks that followed, a thick cloud of dust, soot, and sulfur aerosols blanketed the planet, blocking out sunlight and plunging the world into a prolonged impact winter. Temperatures plummeted, photosynthesis ceased, plants died, herbivores starved, predators followed, the food chain collapsed from the bottom up. By the time the dust settled, roughly 75% of all species on Earth had been wiped out. Every non-avian dinosaur was gone, every pterosaur, every mosasaur. Every ammonite, the world that emerged from the darkness, was unrecognizable. But the asteroid impact was not the only disaster befalling the Earth at the end of the Cretaceous. At roughly the same time, and this may not be a coincidence, massive volcanic eruptions were occurring in what is now India. The Deccan Traps, as these volcanic deposits are known, represent one of the largest volcanic events of the last 500 million years. Over a period of roughly 1 million years, the eruptions released enormous quantities of lava, covering an area of roughly 200,000 square miles to a depth of over a mile in some places. The volcanic gases released during these eruptions, carbon dioxide, sulfur dioxide, and others, would have stressed global ecosystems even without the asteroid impact. Some scientists believe that the dinosaurs were already declining before the asteroid struck, weakened by climate change, sea level fluctuations, and ecological disruptions caused by the Deccan volcanism. The asteroid in this view was merely the final blow, the last straw that broke the back of a world already under severe stress. Other scientists argue that the dinosaurs were still thriving right up until the moment of impact, and that the asteroid alone was sufficient to cause the extinction. The debate continues, but what is beyond dispute is that the combined effect of these two catastrophic events brought the Age of Dinosaurs to a sudden, dramatic, and permanent end. The world that emerged from the Cretaceous-Paleogene extinction was a world of opportunity for the survivors, and among the most important survivors were the mammals. For over 150 million years, mammals had lived in the shadow of the dinosaurs, small, nocturnal, and ecologically marginalized. But with the dinosaurs gone, the world was theirs for the taking, and take it they did. In the 10 million years following the extinction, mammals underwent one of the most rapid evolutionary radiations in the history of life. They evolved into an astonishing array of forms, filling ecological niches that had been occupied by dinosaurs for over 100 million years. Some became massive herbivores, others became apex predators, some took to the trees, others burrowed underground. Some returned to the sea, others took to the air. The diversity of mammals exploded, and the foundations of the modern mammalian world were laid. Among the earliest large mammals to appear after the extinction were the pantodonts, a group of herbivores that included some surprisingly large species for such an early date. Barylamda, a pantodont from the late Paleocene, roughly 60 million years ago, could grow to the size of a large bear. It was a far cry from the mouse-sized mammals that had scurried beneath the feet of T. rex just a few million years earlier. Even more impressive were the Uintathers, bizarre-looking herbivores that appeared during the Eocene epoch. Uintatherium, the best-known member of the group, was the size of a rhinoceros and had one of the strangest skulls of any mammal that has ever lived. Its skull was adorned with 6 bony knobs, 3 pairs arranged along the top of its head, and it possessed a pair of saber-like canine teeth that protruded from its upper jaw. Despite its fearsome appearance, Uintatherium was a plant eater, and its sabers may have been used primarily for display or for stripping bark from trees. The Eocene epoch, which lasted from roughly 56 to 34 million years ago, was a warm, lush period in Earth's history, and it saw the emergence of many of the mammalian orders that are familiar to us today. The first horses appeared during the Eocene, though they bore little resemblance to the magnificent steeds we know today. Eohippus, or Hyracotherium as it is more formally known, was about the size of a fox and had 4 toes on its front feet and 3 on its back feet. It lived in dense forests and fed on soft leaves and fruit. Over the next 50 million years, horses would undergo a remarkable evolutionary transformation, growing larger, losing toes until only one remained on each foot, and adapting to life on the open grasslands that would come to dominate later epochs. The Eocene also saw the first whales, and their evolutionary story is one of the most remarkable in all of biology. The ancestors of whales were not marine animals at all. They were small, 4-legged, hoofed mammals that lived on land, similar in appearance to small dogs or wolves. The earliest known whale ancestor, Pakistan, lived roughly 50 million years ago in what is now Pakistan. It was fully terrestrial with 4 functional legs, and it probably hunted fish along the edges of rivers and estuaries. Over the next 15 million years, whale ancestors became progressively more aquatic. Ambulocetus, whose name means walking whale, was about the size of a large sea lion and could both walk on land and swim in the water. Rhodhostis had smaller hind limbs and a more streamlined body, spending most of its time in the sea. Basilosaurus, which appeared around 40 million years ago, was fully aquatic, with a serpentine body up to 60 feet long and vestigial hind limbs so small they could not have been used for walking. By the time of Basilosaurus, the transition from land to sea was essentially complete, and whales had become the ocean-going giants we know today. The entire transformation from a small dog-like land mammal to a fully aquatic leviathan took only about 15 million years, a remarkably short time for such a profound change in body plan and lifestyle. The early Cenozoic was also the era when the first primates appeared. The oldest known primates date back to the Paleocene epoch, roughly 65 million years ago, and they were small, squirrel-like creatures that lived in trees and fed on insects and fruit. Over the following tens of millions of years, primates diversified and spread across the tropical forests of the world. The first monkeys appeared during the Oligocene epoch, roughly 35 million years ago. The first apes appeared during the Miocene, roughly 20 million years ago. And the lineage that would eventually give rise to humans split from the lineage leading to chimpanzees roughly 6 to 7 million years ago during the late Miocene or early Pliocene. The story of human evolution is, of course, extraordinarily complex and the subject of ongoing research and debate. But the key point for our purposes is that the entire primate lineage, from its humble beginnings in the Paleocene trees to the emergence of Homo sapiens, is a direct consequence of the asteroid that wiped out the dinosaurs. Without that catastrophic impact 66 million years ago, the dinosaurs would likely still be here, and we almost certainly would not. The Cenozoic era, our era, has been marked by dramatic changes in climate and geography. One of the most significant events was the formation of the Antarctic ice sheet, which began roughly 34 million years ago at the boundary between the Eocene and Oligocene epochs. As the continent of Antarctica drifted toward the South Pole and became isolated from the other southern continents, ocean currents reorganized, cutting off the flow of warm water to the Antarctic coast. Temperatures on the continent plummeted and ice began to accumulate. Over millions of years, the Antarctic ice sheet grew to its present massive size, containing roughly 70% of the world's fresh water locked in ice up to 3 miles thick. The formation of this ice sheet had profound effects on global climate, contributing to a long-term cooling trend that would eventually lead to the ice ages of the Pleistocene epoch. The cooling of the global climate during the late Cenozoic had dramatic effects on vegetation and consequently on the animals that depended on it. As temperatures dropped and rainfall patterns shifted, the vast tropical forests that had covered much of the planet began to shrink, replaced by open grasslands and savannas. This transformation, the spread of grasslands, is one of the most important ecological events of the last 30 million years. Grasses are remarkable plants. They grow from the base rather than the tip, allowing them to survive being grazed, trampled, and burned. They reproduce prolifically and spread rapidly, and they contain tiny particles of silica in their leaves, which wear down the teeth of animals that eat them, driving the evolution of tougher, more durable dentition. The spread of grasslands created entirely new ecosystems and drove the evolution of entirely new types of animals. Horses grew larger and faster, evolving long legs and single-toed hooves for running across open terrain. Antelope, bison, and other grazing animals diversified. Predators evolved to chase them, becoming faster, more efficient, and more intelligent. The grassland ecosystems of the Miocene and Pliocene were among the most dynamic and productive the world has ever seen. One of the most spectacular groups of animals to evolve during the Cenozoic were the terror birds, or phorusrhacids. These were giant, flightless, predatory birds that dominated the ecosystems of South America for tens of millions of years. The largest terror birds, such as kelenken, stood over 10 feet tall and had skulls over 2 feet long, larger than a horse's head. Their beaks were massive, hooked, and powerful enough to deliver killing blows to prey animals. Terror birds were the top predators of South America for most of the Cenozoic, filling the ecological role that was occupied by large carnivorous mammals on other continents. Their reign came to an end only when North and South America became connected by the Isthmus of Panama roughly 3 million years ago, allowing mammalian predators, saber-toothed cats, bears, and wolves, to migrate south and compete with the terror birds for resources. The subsequent decline and extinction of the terror birds is one of the most dramatic examples of the ecological upheaval that can result when previously isolated landmasses become connected. The Pleistocene epoch, which began roughly 2.6 million years ago and ended only about 11,700 years ago, is the era most people picture when they think of prehistoric mammals. And for good reason, the Pleistocene was an age of giants. Woolly mammoths, with their massive curved tusks and shaggy coats, roamed the frozen steppes and tundras of the northern hemisphere. Mastodons, their slightly more primitive cousins, inhabited the forests and woodlands. Giant ground sloths such as Megatherium stood over 20 feet tall on their hind legs and weighed as much as an elephant. Saber-toothed cats, most famously Smilodon, prowled the landscapes with their elongated knife-like canine teeth, which could grow to lengths of over 7 inches. Dire wolves, larger and more robustly built than modern gray wolves, hunted in packs across the grasslands and forests. Short-faced bears, standing over 11 feet tall on their hind legs, were among the largest land-based carnivores of the Pleistocene. Glyptodonts, armadillo relatives the size of Volkswagen Beetles, encased in thick, bony armor, grazed alongside the mammoths and ground sloths. The Pleistocene was in many ways the last truly wild era of Earth's history, a time when megafauna still dominated the landscape and humans were just one more species struggling to survive in a world of giants. The Pleistocene was also the age of the ice ages. During this epoch, the Earth's climate oscillated dramatically between glacial periods, when massive ice sheets covered much of the northern hemisphere, and interglacial periods, when the ice retreated and temperatures warmed. At their maximum extent, the glacial ice sheets covered roughly 30% of the Earth's land surface. In the northern hemisphere, ice stretched as far south as modern-day London, Berlin, and the northern parts of the continental interior. The ice sheets were enormous, up to 2 miles thick in places, and they contained so much frozen water that global sea levels dropped by as much as 400 feet. Vast areas of continental shelf that are now underwater were exposed as dry land, creating land bridges that allowed animals and humans to migrate between continents. The most famous of these was Beringia, the land bridge that connected Asia to the western parts of the northern hemisphere, enabling the migration of mammoths, bison, and eventually humans into new territories. The cycles of glaciation during the Pleistocene were driven by subtle variations in Earth's orbit and axial tilt, known as Milankovitch cycles. These cycles affect the amount and distribution of solar energy reaching the Earth's surface, triggering feedback loops that can amplify small changes in temperature into full-blown ice ages. During glacial periods, the growth of ice sheets reflected more sunlight back into space, cooling the planet further. Reduced temperatures led to lower levels of carbon dioxide and water vapor in the atmosphere, weakening the greenhouse effect and causing temperatures to drop even more. The result was a self-reinforcing cycle that could lock the planet into glacial conditions for tens of thousands of years. Breaking out of an ice age required a reversal of these feedbacks, a gradual increase in solar energy due to orbital changes, followed by melting ice, rising carbon dioxide, and warming temperatures. The Pleistocene saw at least 20 major glacial-interglacial cycles, each one reshaping the landscape, driving species migrations, and testing the resilience of life on Earth. The megafauna of the Pleistocene were not confined to the land. The oceans of the Ice Age world were home to their own giants. Megalodon, though it went extinct before the Pleistocene proper, having disappeared roughly 3.6 million years ago during the Pliocene, deserves mention here because its legacy loomed large over the marine ecosystems that followed. Megalodon was the largest shark that has ever lived, reaching estimated lengths of over 50 feet. Some researchers suggest it may have been even larger and weighing as much as 50 tons. Its teeth, which are among the most common fossils found in marine sediments worldwide, could be over 7 inches long. Its jaws could open wide enough to swallow a modern great white shark whole. Megalodon was the undisputed apex predator of the Miocene and Pliocene oceans, feeding on whales, dolphins, sea turtles, and anything else it could catch. Its extinction may have been caused by a combination of climate change, which reduced the warm, shallow seas it preferred, and competition from newly evolved predators, including the ancestors of modern great white sharks and orcas. The end of the Pleistocene brought with it one of the most mysterious and debated events in the history of life, the extinction of the megafauna. Between roughly 50,000 and 10,000 years ago, a staggering number of large animal species went extinct across every continent. In some regions, the losses were catastrophic. Australia lost virtually all of its large animals, giant wombats, marsupial lions, giant kangaroos, and enormous flightless birds, beginning roughly 46,000 years ago. Eurasia lost the woolly rhinoceros, the cave bear, the giant deer Megalosaurus with antlers spanning 12 feet, the cave lion, and eventually the woolly mammoth. The causes of these extinctions remain fiercely debated. Some scientists argue that overhunting by humans was the primary driver. Others point to climate change associated with the end of the last ice age. Still others suggest that a combination of factors, hunting, climate change, habitat loss, and disease, acted together to push these magnificent animals over the edge. What is clear is that the world lost an extraordinary amount of its megafaunal diversity in a remarkably short period of time, and the landscapes we see today, open grasslands, sparse forests, depopulated tundras, are in many ways the impoverished remnants of much richer ecosystems. Among the last of the great Pleistocene mammals to disappear were the woolly mammoths, and their story has a poignant epilogue. While mammoths vanished from the mainland of Europe and Asia roughly 10,000 years ago, a small population survived on Rangel Island, a remote outpost in the Arctic Ocean, until approximately 4,000 years ago. That means that woolly mammoths were still alive when the Great Pyramid of Giza was being built. They were still alive when the Minoan civilization was flourishing on Crete. They were still alive when Stonehenge was already standing on the Salisbury Plain. The Rangel Island mammoths were a dwarf population, smaller than their mainland ancestors, and genetic analysis suggests they suffered from inbreeding and genetic decline in their final centuries. But the fact that they persisted for so long on a tiny island at the edge of the world is a remarkable testament to the resilience of these magnificent animals and a reminder of how recently they shared the planet with us. The prehistoric world was not just shaped by the creatures that inhabited it, but also by the forces that sculpted the planet itself. Throughout Earth's history, the continents have been in constant motion, drifting across the surface of the globe on tectonic plates driven by convection currents in the underlying mantle. This process, known as plate tectonics, has reshaped the geography of the planet many times over. Continents have collided, split apart, drifted to new latitudes, and reassembled in different configurations. Mountain ranges have risen and eroded away. Oceans have opened and closed. Entire seaways have appeared and disappeared. The history of plate tectonics reads like an epic saga of geological drama, and its consequences for the evolution of life have been profound. One of the most important aspects of plate tectonics is the formation and breakup of supercontinents. Over the course of Earth's history, the continents have come together into a single, massive landmass at least 3 times, and possibly more. The most recent supercontinent was Pangaea, which existed from roughly 335 to roughly 175 million years ago. Before Pangaea, there were earlier supercontinents, Rodinia, which formed roughly 1 billion years ago and broke apart around 750 million years ago, and Pannotia, which existed briefly around 600 million years ago. Each time a supercontinent formed, it fundamentally altered ocean circulation patterns, climate, and the distribution of habitats. Each time one broke apart, it created new oceans, isolated populations of organisms on different landmasses, and drove evolutionary divergence. The breakup of Pangaea, for example, separated the dinosaurs of the northern continents from those of the southern continents, leading to the evolution of very different dinosaur faunas in different parts of the world. The forces of plate tectonics have also been responsible for some of the most dramatic geological features on Earth. The Himalayas, the tallest mountain range on the planet, are the result of the ongoing collision between the Indian and Eurasian plates, a collision that began roughly 50 million years ago and is still occurring today, pushing the mountains higher by roughly 5 millimeters per year. The Andes, the longest continental mountain range in the world, were formed by the subduction of the oceanic Nazca Plate beneath the South American Plate. The Mid-Atlantic Ridge, a submarine mountain range that runs down the center of the Atlantic Ocean, marks the boundary where the North American and European plates are pulling apart, creating new ocean floor as magma wells up from below. These geological processes operate on timescales of millions and billions of years, but their effects are visible everywhere in the modern landscape, in the shape of the continents, the depth of the oceans, and the height of the mountains. Volcanic activity, closely linked to plate tectonics, has been another of the great sculptors of the prehistoric world. We have already discussed two of the most catastrophic volcanic events in Earth's history, the Siberian traps, which contributed to the great dying at the end of the Permian, and the Deccan traps, which may have played a role in the end Cretaceous extinction. But these are just the most extreme examples of a process that has been shaping the planet continuously for billions of years. Volcanoes have created new land, destroyed existing landscapes, altered the composition of the atmosphere, and influenced global climate. The eruption of a single large volcano can inject enough sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere to cool the planet by a degree or more for several years. A supervolcano eruption, like the ones that have periodically occurred at Yellowstone, can have even more dramatic effects, potentially triggering years of global cooling, widespread crop failures, and ecosystem disruption. The geological record contains evidence of hundreds of such eruptions, and they have played a significant role in shaping the course of life on Earth. As we come toward the close of this first part of our journey through the prehistoric world, let us pause for a moment and reflect on what we have covered. We have traveled from the hellish birth of the planet, through the origin of life, through billions of years of microbial evolution, through the Cambrian explosion and the colonization of the land. We have watched as fish crawled onto shore and became the ancestors of all land vertebrates. We have witnessed the rise and fall of the greatest animals ever to walk the earth. We have seen mass extinctions reshape the tree of life and open the door for new evolutionary experiments. We have watched mammals emerge from the shadow of the dinosaurs and diversify into the spectacular array of forms we know today. And we have seen how the forces of plate tectonics and volcanism have continuously reshaped the planet itself, creating and destroying habitats on a global scale. But our journey is far from over. In the second part of this documentary, we will delve even deeper into the mysteries of the prehistoric world. We will explore the strangest creatures ever to have lived, the most extreme environments they inhabited, and the most surprising discoveries that modern science has made about the ancient past. We will look at how prehistoric life dealt with challenges that seem almost unimaginable: global temperature swings, toxic atmospheres, and cataclysmic impacts. And we will examine what the prehistoric world can teach us about the future of life on this planet. The prehistoric world was stranger, more violent, more beautiful, and more awe-inspiring than most of us ever imagined. And the best is yet to come. Welcome back. If the first part of our journey through the prehistoric world left you astonished, then brace yourself, because the deeper we dig into the ancient past, the stranger, more extraordinary, and more humbling the story becomes. We have already witnessed the birth of a planet, the origin of life, the rise and fall of dynasties of creatures that ruled for hundreds of millions of years, and the cataclysms that wiped the slate clean again and again. But there are chapters of this story that we have not yet opened. There are creatures we have not yet met, mysteries we have not yet explored, and revelations that will challenge the very way you think about the world beneath your feet. So let us continue. We talked in the first part of this documentary about how dinosaurs dominated the Mesozoic world for over 165 million years. That number is staggering on its own, but it becomes even more remarkable when you consider just how varied the world was during that immense span of time. The Mesozoic was not a single, unchanging era. Climates shifted dramatically. Sea levels rose and fell by hundreds of feet. Continents split apart and drifted to new positions. Ecosystems were assembled, dismantled, and reassembled countless times. And the dinosaurs evolved alongside all of these changes, adapting, diversifying, and reinventing themselves over and over again. There were periods during the Mesozoic when the poles were ice-free and tropical forests extended nearly to the Arctic. There were times when shallow seas flooded the interiors of continents, splitting them into island archipelagos. The world of the early Triassic, when the first small dinosaurs appeared, bore almost no resemblance to the world of the late Cretaceous, when Tyrannosaurus and Triceratops roamed vast floodplains. The dinosaurs did not just survive through all of these changes, they thrived again and again, reinventing themselves to meet every challenge the planet could throw at them. One of the most profound discoveries in recent decades is the realization that many dinosaurs were far more intelligent, social, and behaviorally complex than we ever gave them credit for. For most of the 20th century, dinosaurs were depicted as slow, stupid, cold-blooded reptiles, lumbering behemoths driven by instinct alone. That image has been thoroughly demolished by modern research. Take, for example, the hadrosaurs, the duck-billed dinosaurs of the late Cretaceous. These animals had elaborate cranial crests, hollow, bony structures on the tops of their skulls that are now believed to have functioned as resonating chambers, allowing them to produce loud, distinctive calls. Different species had differently shaped crests and therefore different calls, which may have helped individuals identify members of their own species across vast distances. Parasaurolophus, one of the best-known hadrosaurs, had a crest that curved backward from its skull in a long, tubular arc. Scientists have created computer models of the internal structure of this crest and used them to simulate the sounds it might have produced. The result was a deep, resonant, haunting tone, like the blast of a distant foghorn echoing across a Cretaceous floodplain. The idea that dinosaurs communicated with each other using complex vocalizations is now widely accepted among paleontologists, and it adds a dimension to the Mesozoic world that we never imagined just a few decades ago. Social behavior among dinosaurs extended far beyond vocalizations. Fossil evidence from sites around the world has revealed that many dinosaur species lived in herds, migrated seasonally, and cared for their young. One of the most compelling examples comes from a dinosaur called Maiasaura, whose name means good mother lizard. Discovered in Montana in the late 1970s, Maiasaura nesting sites contain the remains of eggs, hatchlings, juveniles, and adults, all concentrated in a relatively small area. The nests were spaced about 25 feet apart, roughly one adult body length, suggesting a colonial nesting strategy similar to that of modern seabirds. Most significantly, the bones of the hatchlings showed signs of wear on their joints, indicating that the babies had been walking around in the nest for some time before living, which in turn implies that the parents were bringing food to the nest and caring for their young. This was a revolutionary finding. It shattered the assumption that dinosaurs were indifferent parents that simply laid their eggs and walked away. At least some dinosaurs were attentive, nurturing parents, investing significant time and energy in raising their offspring. And the evidence for dinosaur social behavior goes even further. Trackway sites from various parts of the world show that sauropods, the giant, long-necked dinosaurs, traveled in herds, with the largest adults on the outside and the smaller juveniles protected in the center. This formation is remarkably similar to the defensive arrangements seen in modern elephant herds, and it suggests a level of social organization and cooperative behavior that was previously unthinkable for reptilian animals. Some trackway sites show parallel lines of footprints heading in the same direction, stretching for miles, indicating that large groups of dinosaurs were migrating together across vast landscapes. These were not solitary, mindless beasts. They were social animals with complex group dynamics, capable of coordinated movement and mutual protection. Now let us turn our attention to one of the most fascinating aspects of the prehistoric world, the bizarre and often terrifying creatures that inhabited the oceans long before the Age of Dinosaurs. The Paleozoic seas, from the Cambrian through the Permian, were home to animals so strange and so alien that they seem to belong more to science fiction than to natural history. Consider the Eurypterids, commonly known as sea scorpions. These were arthropods, relatives of modern scorpions and horseshoe crabs, that ruled the oceans during the Ordovician and Silurian periods. Some species were small, only a few inches long, but others were absolute giants. Echolopterus, the largest known eurypterid, could grow to lengths of over 8 feet, making it one of the largest arthropods that has ever lived. It had powerful pincers, a segmented body, and a pair of large, paddle-like limbs that it used for swimming. Echolopterus was an apex predator of the Devonian seas, and it likely preyed on fish, smaller arthropods, and anything else it could catch. The idea of an 8-foot scorpion lurking in the waters of the ancient ocean is enough to give anyone pause, but these creatures were real, and they were remarkably successful, persisting for over 200 million years before finally declining during the Permian. The Paleozoic seas also harbored some truly unexpected giants among the cephalopods. Cambrian, a giant orthocone from the Ordovician period, may have been one of the largest animals in the ocean during its time. Orthocones were relatives of modern nautiluses, but instead of coiled shells, they had long, straight, cone-shaped shells. Estimates of Cambrian's size vary, but some researchers suggest it may have reached lengths of over 20 feet, with most of that length being its enormous shell. It was a predator, using its tentacles to grab prey and bring it to its beak-like mouth. In an ocean where most animals were measured in inches, Cambrian was a leviathan, a terrifying reminder that evolutionary gigantism is not limited to the Mesozoic or Cenozoic eras. Moving forward in time, the Mesozoic oceans contain their own share of bizarre and extraordinary creatures beyond the well-known ichthyosaurs, plesiosaurs, and mosasaurs. One of the most unusual was Tanystropheus, a reptile from the Triassic period that possessed one of the most extreme body proportions of any animal in history. Tanystropheus was about 20 feet long, but most of that length, roughly 10 feet, was neck. Its neck was incredibly elongated, composed of only 13 vertebrae that were each stretched to extraordinary lengths. Scientists debated for years whether Tanystropheus was a land animal or an aquatic one. Recent research, including chemical analysis of its fossils, strongly suggests that it was aquatic, living along coastlines, and using its absurdly long neck to ambush fish and squid in shallow waters. Its body plan seems almost impossible, a creature that was more neck than body, but it worked, and Tanystropheus survived for millions of years in the Triassic seas. Another extraordinary marine animal from the Mesozoic was Helicoprion, a shark-like fish from the Permian and Triassic periods that possessed one of the most baffling anatomical features ever discovered. Helicoprion had a spiral-shaped whorl of teeth embedded in its lower jaw, a structure that resembles a circular saw blade or a coiled spring. When the first Helicoprion tooth whorls were discovered in the late 1890s, scientists had no idea where they belonged on the animal's body. Proposed reconstructions placed the whorl on the tip of the snout, on the dorsal fin, curling out of the lower jaw like a tongue, and in various other improbable locations. It was not until the 21st century that CT scans of well-preserved specimens finally revealed the truth. The tooth whorl was located in the back of the lower jaw, where it functioned as a rotating cutting surface, slicing through soft-bodied prey like squid. Helicoprion is a vivid example of how the prehistoric world could produce forms so strange that even the most creative scientists struggled for over a century to make sense of them. The world beneath the waves held other surprises too. During the Cretaceous period, reef ecosystems were built not primarily by corals, as they are today, but by a group of bizarre bivalves called rudists. Rudists were clam-like mollusks that evolved into reef-building forms, with one shell cemented to the seafloor and the other functioning as a lid. Some rudist species grew to enormous sizes, over 3 feet tall, and they formed massive reef structures that stretched for hundreds of miles along the margins of shallow tropical seas. For much of the Cretaceous, rudist reefs were the dominant reef ecosystem on the planet, outcompeting corals and providing habitat for an enormous diversity of marine life. When the asteroid struck at the end of the Cretaceous, the rudists were among the casualties, and their reefs vanished forever. Corals, which had been minor players during the rudist era, eventually reclaimed the role of primary reef builders, a position they hold to this day. Let us now return to the land and consider some of the most extreme environments that prehistoric life managed to conquer. We tend to think of the prehistoric world in terms of lush swamps, tropical forests, and warm, shallow seas, but the reality was far more varied. Throughout Earth's history, life has found ways to survive and even thrive in conditions that would seem utterly inhospitable to us. During the Cretaceous period, for example, dinosaurs lived in polar regions where winter brought months of continuous darkness. Fossil discoveries in what is now Australia, which was connected to Antarctica and located much farther south during the Cretaceous, have revealed the remains of small, agile dinosaurs that endured winter temperatures well below freezing. These polar dinosaurs had large eyes, possibly adapted for seeing in the dim light of the polar winter, and they may have been warm-blooded, generating their own body heat to survive the cold. Some scientists have speculated that polar dinosaurs may have hibernated during the harshest months, while others suggest they migrated to warmer regions, covering hundreds or even thousands of miles each year. The idea of dinosaurs trudging through snow and darkness, huddled together for warmth in a frozen forest at the edge of the world, is a far cry from the sun-drenched Jurassic landscapes we usually imagine. Deserts, too, have a long and dramatic history in the prehistoric world. During the Permian and Triassic periods, when the supercontinent Pangaea dominated the globe, vast portions of the continental interior were arid, sun-scorched wastelands with sand dunes stretching to the horizon. Fossil evidence shows that life managed to survive even in these harsh environments, though it was sparse and highly specialized. Small reptiles, insects, and hardy plants eked out an existence along the margins of dry riverbeds and oases, waiting for the rare rainfall events that brought brief explosions of life to the desert. The sandstone formations left behind by these ancient deserts can still be seen today in various parts of the world, their cross-bedded layers preserving the shapes of dunes that last moved hundreds of millions of years ago. These fossil deserts are a reminder that aridity and extreme heat are not modern phenomena. They have been recurring features of the Earth's climate for as long as there have been continents. One of the most fascinating aspects of the prehistoric world is the way that evolution has repeatedly produced similar solutions to the same problems, a phenomenon known as convergent evolution. We have already mentioned the resemblance between ichthyosaurs and modern dolphins. Both are streamlined, fast-swimming predators with similar body shapes, despite being separated by hundreds of millions of years of evolutionary history and belonging to completely different groups of animals. But convergent evolution goes far beyond this single example. It is one of the most pervasive and remarkable patterns in the history of life. Consider the case of saber teeth. Long blade-like canine teeth have evolved independently in at least 5 separate groups of predatory mammals. The saber-toothed cats, most famously Smilodon, the nimravids, sometimes called false saber-toothed cats, which were not actually cats at all, the barbarophilids, another group of cat-like predators that were not true cats, the creodonts, an extinct order of predatory mammals, and the thylacosmelids, saber-toothed marsupials from South America. Each of these groups evolved elongated canine teeth independently, arriving at a similar anatomical solution through completely different evolutionary pathways. The thylacosmelids are perhaps the most remarkable example, because they were marsupials, pouched mammals more closely related to kangaroos and opossums than to any placental predator, and yet they evolved saber teeth that were functionally almost identical to those of Smilodon. Thylacosmelus, the best-known thylacosmelid, had saber teeth that were ever-growing, continuously replacing themselves from the base, a feature not seen in any of the placental saber-toothed predators. Its skull was built differently, its jaw mechanics were different, and its evolutionary history was completely independent, yet the end result, a predator with long, blade-like fangs, was strikingly similar. This kind of convergence tells us something profound about the nature of evolution. Given similar environmental pressures and ecological opportunities, life tends to arrive at similar solutions, regardless of its starting point. Convergent evolution has produced many other striking parallels in the prehistoric world. The marsupial mammals of Australia evolved forms that are remarkably similar to placental mammals on other continents. Marsupial moles that look and behave like placental moles, marsupial gliders that resemble flying squirrels, the thylacine Tasmanian tiger that was astonishingly wolf-like in its overall appearance and hunting behavior, and even marsupial equivalents of large cats and bears. In each case, completely unrelated animals, isolated on different continents for tens of millions of years, evolved similar body plans, behaviors, and ecological roles. The message is clear. The forces of natural selection are powerful and predictable enough to shape life into similar forms again and again, wherever and whenever similar opportunities arise. Now let us consider something that does not often get discussed in popular accounts of prehistoric life: the role of parasites in disease. We tend to focus on the dramatic, the teeth, the claws, the horns, the sheer size, but the truth is that parasites and pathogens have been shaping the course of evolution for as long as life has existed, and their influence on the prehistoric world was profound. Fossil evidence of parasitism stretches back hundreds of millions of years. Parasitic worms have been found preserved in the coprolites, fossilized feces of dinosaurs. Ticks have been discovered entombed in amber, some of them still engorged with the blood of their hosts. One remarkable specimen, found in Burmese amber dating to the Cretaceous period, preserves a tick clinging to a dinosaur feather, providing direct evidence that these blood-sucking parasites fed on dinosaurs. Insects preserved in amber have been found carrying malaria-like parasites, suggesting that diseases similar to modern malaria were already circulating among animals tens of millions of years ago. The evolutionary arms race between hosts and parasites is one of the oldest and most relentless in the history of life, and it has driven the evolution of immune systems, behavioral defenses, and countless other adaptations in every group of animals that has ever existed. Disease even left its mark on the bones of dinosaurs. Paleopathology, the study of disease in ancient organisms, has revealed that dinosaurs suffered from a wide range of ailments that are familiar to us today. Fossil bones show evidence of arthritis, infections, tumors, broken bones that healed improperly, and even gout. A Tyrannosaurus rex specimen known as Sue, one of the most complete T-Rex skeletons ever found, shows evidence of multiple healed injuries, including broken ribs, a damaged shoulder blade, and a diseased jaw. Some of Sue's injuries are consistent with bites from another T-Rex, suggesting that these animals fought with each other, perhaps over territory, mates, or food. The image of two massive tyrannosaurs locked in combat, inflicting terrible wounds on each other with their enormous jaws, is both dramatic and sobering. Even the mightiest animals in the history of the planet were vulnerable to injury, illness, and pain. Let us now turn to one of the most remarkable periods of mammalian evolution, the explosion of diversity that occurred in the aftermath of the asteroid impact that ended the Cretaceous. We touched on this in Part 1, but the details of this radiation deserve closer attention, because they involve some of the strangest and most unexpected creatures in the history of mammalian life. In the first 10 to 15 million years after the dinosaurs disappeared, mammals evolved into forms that seem almost unbelievable. Andrewsarchus, known from a single enormous skull discovered in Mongolia, may have been the largest terrestrial mammalian predator that has ever lived. Its skull was over 32 inches long, larger than that of any known land-dwelling carnivorous mammal, and its body, while difficult to estimate from the skull alone, may have been the size of a large horse. The most surprising thing about Andrewsarchus is that it was not a member of any modern group of carnivores. It belonged to an extinct group that was more closely related to modern hippos, pigs, and even whales than to dogs, cats, or bears. The early Cenozoic was a time when the ecological roles we associate with specific types of animals today had not yet been established. The mammals were experimenting, filling empty niches with whatever body plans and adaptations happened to arise, and the results were often bizarre. Another extraordinary early mammal was Ambulocetus, which we mentioned briefly in Part 1. This walking whale is worth revisiting because it represents one of the most dramatic transformations in evolutionary history. Imagine an animal the size of a large sea lion, with powerful jaws lined with sharp teeth, short legs with webbed feet, and a long, muscular tail. It could walk on land, albeit clumsily, but it was also a capable swimmer, using an undulating motion of its spine and tail to propel itself through the water, a swimming style similar to that of a modern otter. Ambulocetus lived along the coastal rivers and estuaries of what is now Pakistan, roughly 49 million years ago, and it spent its time lurking in shallow water, ambushing prey that came to drink at the water's edge, much like a modern crocodile. It is one of the key transitional fossils in the whale evolution story, and it demonstrates just how quickly and dramatically evolution can reshape an animal's body when ecological opportunity knocks. The Eocene epoch was particularly rich in bizarre mammals. In the seas, the first Sirenians, the ancestors of modern manatees and dugongs, appeared, evolving from land-dwelling herbivores into gentle, slow-moving aquatic grazers. On land, the forests teemed with early primates, many of them so small they could fit in the palm of your hand. There were also predators like Mesonyx, a wolf-sized hoofed carnivore, yes, a predator with hooves instead of claws that chased prey across the forest floor. The early Cenozoic was a time of extraordinary experimentation, when evolution was throwing every conceivable body plan at the wall to see what stuck. Many of these early experiments ultimately failed, their lineages going extinct without leaving any descendants. But others succeeded spectacularly, giving rise to the familiar groups of mammals we know today. One of the most dramatic episodes of Cenozoic evolution occurred when the grasslands began to spread across the world during the Miocene epoch, roughly 20 to 5 million years ago. We discussed the general ecological effects of the grassland expansion in Part 1, but the specific evolutionary innovations it drove are worth exploring in more detail. Grass is, despite its humble appearance, one of the most remarkable plants on Earth. It is incredibly tough, resistant to grazing, fire, and drought. It grows from the base, so even if an animal eats the top of the blade, the plant continues to grow. And it contains silica, tiny particles of glass embedded in its cells, which wear down the teeth of any animal that eats it. The spread of grasses created an entirely new type of ecosystem, one that demanded entirely new adaptations from the animals that lived in it. Herbivores that fed on grass needed tougher teeth to cope with the abrasive silica. Many lineages evolved high-crowned teeth that were much taller than those of their ancestors, providing more material to be worn away over a lifetime of grass eating. Horses are the classic example. Early horses like Eohippus had low-crowned teeth suited for soft forest vegetation. As grasslands spread, horse evolution shifted dramatically. Teeth became taller and harder, jaws became deeper to accommodate the larger teeth, and the digestive system evolved to extract nutrients from tough, fibrous grasses. At the same time, life on the open grasslands exposed herbivores to predators in ways that life in dense forests did not. There were no trees to hide behind, no thick underbrush to crawl into. Survival on the open plain required speed, and speed required long legs, light bodies, and specialized feet. Horses lost their side toes, eventually running on a single enlarged middle toe, the hoof. Their legs became longer and more slender, their muscles concentrated high on the body for efficient, energy-saving locomotion. The modern horse is the product of 50 million years of evolutionary fine-tuning, shaped by the relentless pressures of grass, predators, and open landscapes. But horses were not the only animals transformed by the grassland revolution. Ruminants, the group that includes cattle, sheep, deer, and antelope, evolved complex, multi-chambered stomachs that allowed them to ferment and digest grass more efficiently than any other group of mammals. Their digestive strategy, which involves swallowing food, partially digesting it in a specialized stomach chamber, regurgitating it, chewing it again, a process known as rumination or chewing the cud, and then digesting it further, was a brilliant evolutionary solution to the problem of extracting nutrition from tough, low-quality plant material. It made ruminants the most successful group of large herbivores on the planet, and they remain so today. Predators, too, were transformed by the grassland revolution. The open plains demanded a different style of hunting than the dense forests. In the forest, ambush predation, hiding in cover and pouncing on unsuspecting prey was the dominant strategy. On the open grasslands, pursuit predation became more effective. Predators that could chase down their prey over long distances had an advantage, and this drove the evolution of long legs, lean bodies, and exceptional endurance in many predator lineages. The canids, the family that includes wolves, foxes, and domestic dogs, are perhaps the best example. Early canids were small, fox-like forest dwellers. As grasslands expanded, some canid lineages evolved into the long-legged pack-hunting wolves that we know today, capable of pursuing prey for miles across open terrain. The co-evolution of grassland predators and prey is one of the great evolutionary dramas of the Cenozoic, a relentless arms race of speed, endurance, senses, and intelligence that produced many of the most magnificent animals of the modern world. Speaking of evolutionary arms races, one of the most fascinating involves the evolution of venom. Venom is one of the most potent weapons in the animal kingdom, and its history stretches back far further than most people realize. The earliest venomous animals may have appeared during the Cambrian period, over 500 million years ago, though direct fossil evidence of venom that old is difficult to obtain. What we do know is that venom has evolved independently in dozens of separate animal lineages, in snakes, lizards, spiders, scorpions, centipedes, jellyfish, cone snails, shrews, and even a few species of fish and frogs. Each time, the evolution of venom has followed a similar pattern. Pre-existing proteins, originally produced for other purposes, such as digestion or blood clotting, were co-opted and modified by natural selection into toxic compounds that could be injected into prey or predators. The result is a staggering diversity of venoms, each one a unique cocktail of proteins and peptides tailored to the specific needs of its owner. In the prehistoric world, venom played roles that we are only beginning to understand. Some Mesozoic mammals may have been venomous. A few modern mammals, including the platypus, several species of shrews, and the solenodons of the Caribbean, possess venom, and the evolutionary distribution of this trait suggests that it may have been more common among early mammals than it is today. Some scientists have even speculated that certain dinosaurs may have been venomous, though direct evidence for this is slim. Sinornithosaurus, a small feathered dinosaur from the Cretaceous of China, was initially described as having grooved teeth and possible venom glands, leading to dramatic headlines about venomous dinosaurs. Subsequent research has cast doubt on this interpretation, and the question remains open. But whether or not any dinosaurs were truly venomous, the broader point stands. Venom has been a recurring theme in the history of life, evolving again and again in different lineages in different eras as one of nature's most effective weapons. Let us now explore a topic that touches on the very nature of extinction itself. Throughout this documentary, we have discussed several mass extinctions: the end Ordovician, the late Devonian, the end Permian, the end Triassic, and the end Cretaceous. These are the so-called Big Five mass extinctions, the most severe episodes of species loss in Earth's history. But it is important to understand that extinction is not limited to these catastrophic events. Extinction is a constant background process that has been occurring continuously throughout the history of life. Species arise through speciation, persist for a while, and then disappear. The average lifespan of a mammal species, based on the fossil record, is roughly 1 to 2 million years. For marine invertebrates, it is somewhat longer, perhaps 5 to 10 million years. Very few species persist for tens of millions of years, and none last forever. Extinction is the fate of every species, including, eventually, our own. The Big Five mass extinctions were simply episodes when the rate of extinction spiked dramatically above this background level, driven by extreme environmental changes that overwhelmed the adaptive capacity of most species. What is particularly interesting about mass extinctions is that they are not random in their effects. They tend to hit certain types of organisms harder than others, and the survivors are not necessarily the best or most advanced species. Survival during a mass extinction often depends on factors that are irrelevant during normal times, things like body size, metabolic rate, geographic range, and sheer luck. During the end Cretaceous extinction, for example, large animals were disproportionately affected. Every land animal weighing more than about 55 pounds went extinct. Smaller animals, small mammals, birds, lizards, snakes, turtles, crocodilians, and amphibians had a much better chance of survival, probably because they could find shelter underground or underwater, required less food, and could subsist on seeds, insects, and detritus when the food chain collapsed. The survivors of the end Cretaceous extinction were not the strongest, the fastest, or the smartest. They were the smallest, the most generalized, and the most resilient. Survival in the face of a mass extinction is less about fitness in the Darwinian sense and more about being in the right place, at the right size, at the right time. This brings us to a remarkable and often underappreciated aspect of Earth's history, the role of sheer contingency, or, to put it more simply, luck, in shaping the course of life. The history of life on Earth is not a smooth, inevitable progression from simple to complex, from small to large, from primitive to advanced. It is a meandering, unpredictable saga full of dead ends, false starts, and sudden, dramatic reversals. If the asteroid had missed Earth 66 million years ago, the dinosaurs would almost certainly still be here, and mammals would still be small, nocturnal creatures living in the shadows. If the great dying at the end of the Permian had been slightly worse, it might have wiped out all complex life on Earth, and the planet might today be inhabited only by bacteria. The oxygen-producing cyanobacteria had never evolved, the atmosphere might still be devoid of oxygen, and complex life might never have appeared at all. Every major turning point in the history of life was contingent on a specific set of circumstances, and if any of those circumstances had been even slightly different, the world would look nothing like it does today. The famous paleontologist Stephen Jay Gould illustrated this idea with a thought experiment he called replaying the tape of life. If we could somehow rewind the history of life back to any point and let it play forward again, Gould argued, the results would be dramatically different every time. The specific species that emerged, the body plans that evolved, the ecosystems that assembled, all of these would be different, because evolution is influenced by so many random, unpredictable events, mutations, genetic drift, environmental fluctuations, catastrophic impacts, that no two replays would look the same. This is a humbling thought. It means that our own existence, the existence of Homo sapiens, of consciousness, of civilization, is not the inevitable product of some grand evolutionary plan. It is the result of a specific, unrepeatable sequence of events stretching back billions of years, any one of which could have gone differently. Let us now turn to a topic that has captured the public imagination more than almost any other in paleontology, the possibility of bringing extinct species back to life. The idea of extinction, using genetic technology to resurrect species that have been lost, has been a staple of science fiction for decades, most famously in the Jurassic Park franchise. But how realistic is this idea, and what does the science actually tell us? The answer is nuanced. For dinosaurs, the prospect of extinction remains firmly in the realm of fantasy. DNA is a fragile molecule that degrades over time, and under the best possible conditions, it has a half-life of roughly 521 years. This means that after 521 years, half of the bonds in a DNA molecule will have broken down. After another 521 years, half of the remaining bonds will have broken. and so on until the DNA is completely degraded. Under typical conditions, DNA becomes unreadable after roughly 1 to 2 million years. The dinosaurs went extinct 66 million years ago, far, far beyond the limits of DNA preservation. No intact dinosaur DNA has ever been recovered, and almost certainly none ever will be. The dream of cloning a dinosaur from ancient DNA is, by the laws of chemistry and physics, essentially impossible. However, for more recently extinct species, the picture is very different. Scientists have successfully recovered readable DNA from specimens that are tens of thousands of years old, preserved in permafrost or other cold, dry environments. Woolly mammoth DNA has been extensively sequenced, and several research groups are actively working on projects to use genetic engineering to introduce mammoth traits, such as cold tolerance, shaggy hair, and subcutaneous fat, into the genome of the Asian elephant, the mammoth's closest living relative. The goal is not to create a true woolly mammoth. That would be impossible without a complete, intact mammoth genome and a living mammoth to serve as a surrogate, but to create a cold-adapted elephant that could fill the ecological role that mammoths once played in the Arctic tundra. Whether this should be done is another question entirely, one that raises profound ethical, ecological, and philosophical issues. But the fact that it could be done, at least in principle, is a testament to the extraordinary advances in genetic technology that have occurred in recent years. Speaking of ancient DNA, one of the most revolutionary developments in modern paleontology has been the application of molecular biology techniques to the study of prehistoric life. By extracting and analyzing DNA, proteins, and other biomolecules from fossils, scientists have been able to answer questions that were previously unanswerable using traditional paleontological methods alone. For example, molecular analysis has confirmed that birds are the living descendants of theropod dinosaurs, a conclusion that was already strongly supported by anatomical evidence, but is now essentially proven by genetic data. Molecular studies have also revealed the evolutionary relationships among many groups of organisms with far greater precision than fossil anatomy alone could provide, resolving long-standing debates and revealing unexpected connections between seemingly disparate groups. The discovery that whales are most closely related to hippos, for instance, was made possible primarily by molecular evidence, which showed that the two groups share a common ancestor that lived roughly 55 million years ago. Even more remarkably, scientists have found evidence that some biological molecules can survive in fossils for far longer than anyone thought possible. In 2005, a team led by paleontologist Mary Schweitzer announced the discovery of soft tissue, including what appeared to be blood vessels, cells, and collagen, preserved inside the leg bone of a Tyrannosaurus rex that was 68 million years old. The announcement was met with widespread skepticism because it seemed to violate everything we knew about the chemistry of fossilization. Proteins and soft tissues were not supposed to survive for tens of millions of years, but subsequent research has confirmed and expanded Schweitzer's findings. Collagen, the most abundant protein in animal bones, has been recovered from multiple dinosaur specimens and subjected to rigorous chemical analysis. Amino acid sequences extracted from these ancient proteins have been used to confirm the evolutionary relationship between dinosaurs and modern birds. The discovery of preserved soft tissue in dinosaur bones has opened an entirely new frontier in paleontology, one that promises to reveal details about dinosaur biology, their metabolism, their immune systems, their growth rates that could never be determined from bones alone. Let us now revisit a subject that we touched on earlier, the astonishing creatures of the Cenozoic era, the Age of Mammals. We have discussed the early experiments, the giant predators, the walking whales, the bizarre herbivores, but the Cenozoic produced many more extraordinary animals that deserve mention. Consider the entelodonts, a group of large, pig-like omnivores that roamed the northern hemisphere during the Eocene and Oligocene epochs, from roughly 45 to 25 million years ago. Entelodonts are sometimes called hell pigs or terminator pigs, and the nicknames are well earned. Despite their resemblance to pigs, entelodonts were actually more closely related to hippos and whales. The largest species, Dimetrodon, stood over 6 feet tall at the shoulder, as large as a bison, and had a massive skull armed with powerful jaws and conical teeth capable of crushing bone. Entelodonts were likely aggressive, opportunistic omnivores, feeding on everything from plants and carrion to live prey. Fossil evidence shows that they engaged in violent confrontations with each other, their skulls bearing scars and healed fractures from head-to-head combat. They were among the most fearsome animals of their time, and their combination of size, power, and aggression made them apex predators in many of the ecosystems they inhabited. Then there were the Calicotheres, perhaps the oddest-looking mammals that have ever lived. Calicotheres were relatives of horses and rhinoceroses, but they looked nothing like either. They had horse-like heads, long forelimbs, shorter hind limbs, and most bizarrely large, curved claws instead of hooves on their front feet. Some species walked on their knuckles, like gorillas, to protect their claws. The claws were likely used for pulling down tree branches and stripping bark, allowing Calicotheres to feed on vegetation that was out of reach for other herbivores. The largest Calicotheres stood over 8 feet tall at the shoulder and may have weighed over a ton. They persisted from the Eocene through the Pleistocene, a span of nearly 40 million years, making them one of the most successful and long-lived groups of large mammals in the Cenozoic. Yet despite their success, they are almost completely unknown to the general public, overshadowed by more famous contemporaries like horses, elephants, and big cats. The Cenozoic also produced some truly gigantic birds, beyond the terror birds we discussed in Part 1. During the Eocene, a bird called Gastornis, formerly known as Diatryma, stood over 6 feet tall and had a massive, deep beak that could crack nuts, crush bones, or, as some researchers have suggested, deliver powerful biting attacks to prey. For years, Gastornis was depicted as a fearsome predator, the dominant carnivore of the early Eocene forests. However, recent research, including chemical analysis of its bones and the biomechanics of its beak, has suggested that Gastornis may actually have been a herbivore, using its powerful beak to crack seeds and hard-shelled fruit rather than to kill prey. If this interpretation is correct, then Gastornis was essentially a giant, flightless parrot, a far cry from the terrifying predator it was once believed to be, but no less remarkable for that. In the seas of the Cenozoic, mammals were not the only group producing giants. Birds, too, returned to the ocean in spectacular fashion. The Pelagornithids, or bony-toothed birds, were a group of enormous seabirds that plied the world's oceans from the Paleocene to the Pliocene, a span of nearly 60 million years. The largest Pelagornithids had wingspans of over 20 feet, making them the largest flying birds that have ever lived. Their wings were long and narrow, perfectly adapted for soaring over the open ocean for hours or even days without flapping, and their beaks were lined with bony, tooth-like projections, not true teeth, but spiky extensions of the beak bone that helped them grip slippery fish and squid. Pelagornithids were the albatrosses of the Cenozoic, but on a scale that dwarfs even the largest modern albatross. Now let us turn to a topic that might seem surprising in a documentary about the prehistoric world: color. For most of the history of paleontology, the color of extinct animals was considered unknowable. Fossils preserved the shape and structure of bones, shells, and teeth, but the soft tissues, skin, feathers, fur, that carry an animal's color rarely survive the fossilization process. As a result, the colors of dinosaurs, ancient mammals, and other prehistoric creatures were left to the imagination of artists, who could paint them in any color they chose, with no way to verify their guesses. That changed dramatically in the early 21st century, when scientists discovered that microscopic structures called melanosomes, the organelles that produce and store the pigment melanin in the cells of modern animals, can be preserved in fossils. Melanosomes come in different shapes, and the shape of a melanosome is correlated with the color it produces. Round melanosomes produce reddish-brown and yellowish colors. elongated melanosomes produce black and dark brown. By examining the shape, density, and arrangement of melanosomes in fossilized feathers and skin, scientists can reconstruct the colors of extinct animals with remarkable precision. The first animal to have its full body color pattern reconstructed from fossil evidence was Anchiornis, a small feathered dinosaur from the late Jurassic of China. The analysis revealed that Anchiornis had a mostly dark body with white patches on its wings and a reddish-brown crest on its head, a color pattern not unlike that of a modern woodpecker. Since then, the colors of dozens of other prehistoric animals have been determined, including Sinosauropteryx, a small dinosaur with a reddish-brown and white striped tail, Microraptor, a four-winged dinosaur with iridescent black feathers that shimmered like a crow's plumage, and even some ancient marine reptiles. The discovery that we can determine the actual colors of animals that lived tens or even hundreds of millions of years ago is one of the most exciting developments in modern paleontology, and it has transformed our understanding of how prehistoric animals looked, lived, and interacted with each other. Color was not just about aesthetics, of course. In the modern world, animal coloration serves many crucial functions: camouflage, warning signals, species recognition, sexual display, and there is every reason to believe that the same was true in the prehistoric world. The striped tail of Sinosauropteryx may have served as camouflage, breaking up the outline of the animal's body against a dappled forest background. The iridescent plumage of Microraptor may have been used for sexual display, dazzling potential mates with flashes of metallic color. Some fossil skin impressions from large dinosaurs show patterns of light and dark that are consistent with countershading, a camouflage strategy in which the upper surface of an animal is dark and the lower surface is light, making the animal harder to see by reducing the appearance of three-dimensional shadow. Countershading is extremely common in modern animals, from deer to sharks to penguins, and the discovery that dinosaurs used the same strategy suggests that predation pressure shaped dinosaur coloration in much the same way it shapes animal coloration today. Another extraordinary window into the behavior and biology of prehistoric animals has been opened by the study of fossilized trackways. Trackways, the preserved footprints and trails of ancient animals, provide information that bones alone cannot. They reveal how animals moved, how fast they traveled, whether they walked alone or in groups, and how they interacted with each other and their environment. Some trackway sites preserve evidence of dinosaur stampedes, with dozens or hundreds of footprints running in the same direction, possibly fleeing from a predator. Others show the parallel tracks of sauropods walking side by side, confirming herding behavior. Still others preserve the tracks of predators stalking their prey, the two sets of footprints converging in a drama that played out millions of years ago but is still readable in the rock today. One of the most famous trackway sites in the world is located in the Paluxy River bed of Texas, where the footprints of sauropods and large theropods are preserved in limestone dating to the early Cretaceous, roughly 113 million years ago. Some of the tracks at this site appear to show a theropod following a sauropod, step for step, in what may be evidence of a predator tracking its prey. The theropod tracks are deep and well-defined, suggesting a large, heavy animal moving with purpose. The sauropod tracks are enormous, some over 3 feet long, and they show the distinctive pattern of a massive quadruped moving at a steady pace. Whether the theropod actually attacked the sauropod is impossible to know from the trackways alone, but the scene they preserve is vivid and evocative. A predator and its potential prey walking the same path, separated perhaps by only minutes or hours, their interaction frozen in stone for over 100 million years. Trackways have also provided surprising information about the speed and agility of dinosaurs. For years, scientists debated how fast large theropods like Tyrannosaurus could run. Estimates ranged from a plodding walk of about 5 miles per hour to a terrifying sprint of over 40 miles per hour. Biomechanical analysis of T-Rex leg bones and muscles, combined with computer simulations, has suggested that the truth lies somewhere in between. Adult T-Rex could probably manage speeds of about 15 to 25 miles per hour. Impressive for a 9-ton animal, but not nearly as fast as Hollywood depictions would have us believe. Smaller theropods, on the other hand, were much faster. Ornithomimids, the ostrich-mimic dinosaurs, had long, slender legs and lightweight bodies that may have allowed them to reach speeds of over 40 miles per hour, making them among the fastest dinosaurs that ever lived. Let us now consider the extraordinary phenomenon of island evolution, which produced some of the most bizarre and unexpected creatures in the prehistoric world. When animal populations become isolated on islands, they tend to evolve in peculiar ways, driven by the unique pressures of island life. Large animals tend to get smaller, a phenomenon known as island dwarfism, because islands have limited food resources and smaller bodies require less energy to maintain. Small animals, on the other hand, tend to get larger, island gigantism, because islands often lack the large predators that keep small animal populations in check on the mainland. The fossil record is full of stunning examples of both phenomena. During the Pleistocene, the Mediterranean islands were home to dwarf elephants, descendants of full-sized elephants that had crossed to the islands during periods of low sea level and then shrunk over thousands of years of isolation. Some Mediterranean dwarf elephants were no larger than a modern pig, standing only about 3 feet tall at the shoulder. Their tiny skulls, with their characteristic single, large nasal opening for the trunk, are thought by some researchers to have inspired the myth of the Cyclops in ancient Greek mythology. The skulls do indeed look remarkably like the head of a one-eyed giant when viewed from the front. Island gigantism, meanwhile, produced some truly spectacular creatures. The giant tortoises of the Galapagos and Seychelles are living examples, but the prehistoric world produced far more extreme cases. On the island of Madagascar, which has been isolated from the African mainland for roughly 88 million years, evolution produced a menagerie of unique and extraordinary animals. Elephant birds, massive, flightless birds that stood over 10 feet tall and weighed over 1,000 pounds, roamed the island's forests and grasslands until as recently as 1,000 years ago. Their eggs, which were over a foot long and could hold the equivalent of roughly 160 chicken eggs, are the largest eggs of any known animal, including dinosaurs. Elephant birds went extinct only after humans arrived on Madagascar, and their disappearance is one of the most dramatic examples of human-caused extinction in the recent past. New Zealand, another long isolated island, produced its own giant flightless birds, the moa. There were 9 known species of moa, ranging in size from species no larger than a turkey to the giant South Island moa, which stood over 12 feet tall including its neck and was the tallest bird that has ever lived. Moa had no wings at all, not even vestigial ones, making them unique among birds. They were the dominant herbivores in New Zealand's ecosystems for millions of years, filling the ecological role that mammals played on other continents. New Zealand had no native land mammals except for bats, so the moa had no predators until the arrival of Haast's eagle, the largest eagle that has ever lived, with a wingspan of over 9 feet and talons the size of a tiger's claws. Haast's eagle evolved specifically to hunt moa, swooping down from above and striking its prey with devastating force. Both the moa and Haast's eagle went extinct within a few centuries of the arrival of humans on New Zealand, roughly 700 years ago. The loss of these extraordinary birds is a vivid reminder of the vulnerability of island species to the introduction of new predators, including human ones. As we near the end of our journey through the prehistoric world, let us consider one final, sweeping theme: the deep interconnectedness of all life on Earth and the way that the events of the distant past continue to shape our world today. The air we breathe was created by cyanobacteria billions of years ago. The coal and oil we burn for energy are the fossilized remains of Carboniferous forests and ancient marine organisms. The limestone in our buildings is made of the compressed shells of countless trillions of marine creatures that lived and died over hundreds of millions of years. The very soil beneath our feet is in large part a product of biological processes that have been operating for hundreds of millions of years: the decomposition of dead plants and animals, the burrowing of worms and insects, the chemical weathering of rock by bacteria and fungi. We are surrounded at every moment by the legacy of the prehistoric world. It is in the ground we walk on, the air we breathe, the water we drink, and the genetic code we carry in every cell of our bodies. The study of the prehistoric world is not merely an exercise in curiosity, though curiosity is reason enough. It is a way of understanding who we are, where we came from, and what forces have shaped the planet we call home. Every fossil, every ancient rock, every trace of vanished life is a page in the longest story ever told, the story of our planet and the extraordinary, improbable, endlessly creative process of evolution that has populated it with life for nearly 4 billion years. The creatures we have met on this journey, from the first microscopic cells to the giant dinosaurs, from the Cambrian sea scorpions to the Pleistocene mammoths, from the feathered raptors to the walking whales, are our relatives, our predecessors, and our fellow travelers on this small blue planet hurtling through the void of space. The prehistoric world was not a separate world from our own. It is our world in an earlier chapter. And understanding that chapter with all its wonders, its catastrophes, its triumphs, and its tragedies is essential to understanding the chapter we are living in now. Because the same forces that shaped the prehistoric world, plate tectonics, climate change, evolution, extinction, are still at work today, operating on the same planet, governed by the same laws of nature, with consequences that are just as profound. The fossils in the rock are not just relics of a vanished past. They are warnings and they are promises. They warn us that the world is capable of change on a scale that is almost unimaginable, that entire ecosystems can be wiped out in a geological instant, that climates can shift with terrifying speed, that species that seemed invincible can disappear without a trace. But they also promise us that life is resilient, creative, and endlessly adaptable, that no matter how severe the catastrophe, no matter how complete the devastation, life finds a way to recover, to reinvent itself, and to fill the world once again with beauty and diversity and wonder. 4.5 billion years of Earth's history have brought us to this moment. Billions of species have lived and died. 5 mass extinctions have reshaped the tree of life. Continents have drifted, oceans have risen and fallen, ice ages have come and gone, and through it all, life has persisted, sometimes barely, sometimes gloriously, but always, always persisting. That is perhaps the most surprising fact of all about the prehistoric world. Not the size of the dinosaurs, or the teeth of the sharks, or the wings of the pterosaurs, or the violence of the extinctions, but the sheer, stubborn, indomitable persistence of life itself, the refusal to surrender, the willingness to start over, the ability to find a way, no matter how hostile the world becomes. That is the lesson of the prehistoric world, and it is a lesson worth remembering. Thank you for joining us on this extraordinary journey through the deep history of our planet. From the molten hellscape of the Hadean Aeon to the ice-covered plains of the Pleistocene, from the tiniest bacterium to the mightiest dinosaur, we have covered billions of years of Earth's incredible story. The prehistoric world was stranger, more violent, more beautiful, and more awe-inspiring than anything we could have imagined. And the best part is that we are still discovering its secrets. Every year, new fossils are unearthed, new techniques are developed, and new insights are gained. The story of the prehistoric world is far from fully told. There are chapters still waiting to be written, surprises still waiting to be uncovered, and wonders still waiting to be revealed. The planet beneath your feet has a story to tell. All you have to do is listen.